The National Railway Museum was established back in 1975, and 50 years later, it is now home to a wide variety of steam, diesel and electric locomotives, including some of the most famous locomotives in the world. This was yet another place that I had wanted to visit all my life, and I finally had the chance to go there on Monday the 21st of April 2025. At the time of my visit, the sole surviving LNER A3 Pacific was on display in the North Shed. More on the A3 later. The NRM is within walking distance of York Railway Station, a major hub on the East Coast Main Line. It's a decent place for train spotters wanting to see a wide variety of motive power, but I didn't like the station myself due to the overwhelming noise, especially from all the idling diesel engines, with the Class 185 Desiros being the worst offenders. Surprisingly, entrance to the NRM is free of charge, although they do accept donations of course. Once you go through the main entrance, you're straight into the Great Hall, a former engine shed built in 1877. On this occasion, the turntable was occupied by Great Western Railway Star Class 460 No. 4003 Load Star. The museum ended up being much busier than I was expecting, although, at the time, I didn't realise that the 21st of April was a bank holiday. Don't quote me on this, but I think a bank holiday is the British equivalent of what New Zealanders would know as a public holiday. Upon entering the Great Hall, the first locomotive we noticed was number 990 Henry Oakley, an express engine from the Great Northern Railway, not to be confused with the modern-day train operating company that's also called Great Northern. 990 was built at Doncaster in 1898 to the design of Henry Ivett, and is significant for being the UK's first 442 Atlantic locomotive. He is also the sole surviving example of the small boiler variant of the C1 class, which were redesignated as C2 under the London and North Eastern Railway to avoid confusion with their large boiler cousins, which kept the C1 designation. I recommend watching the NRM's Curator with a Camera episode on 990 if you're interested in learning more about him. The C2 isn't the only Great Northern Express engine at the NRM, for they also have the iconic Stirling Single No. 1 in their collection. This elegant machine was built in 1870 to the design of Patrick Stirling, and put to work hauling express trains on the East Coast Main Line out of London King's Cross. Perhaps the most eye-catching aspect of her design is the single driving axle, complete with enormous 8-foot 1-inch diameter driving wheels. In the 19th century, it wasn't uncommon for UK express engines to only have one driving axle. The Stirling Singles were good locomotives for their time, but they struggled to cope with the increasing workload. As the Ivett Atlantics came online, the Singles were gradually withdrawn, with the last one going in 1916. The preserved example was withdrawn in 1907, and is now the sole survivor of her class, although she has spent most of her time in preservation as a static exhibit. In the early 2000s, she was famously used as the basis for Emily from Thomas the Tank Engine. Further around the turntable, one could find a 92220 Evening Star, an example of the British Railways standard 9F class 210. The 9Fs were designed by Robert Riddles and built between 1954 and 1960, with Evening Star being the last 9F ever built, and she was even earmarked for preservation upon completion at Swindon Works. Sadly, these engines all ended up having scandalously short working lives, with all 251 examples having been withdrawn by June 1968. In Evening Star's case, she was withdrawn in 1965 after only 5 years in BR service. On the plus side, 9 examples of this class have survived into preservation, although Evening Star is the only one that I've seen in person. In stark contrast to the massive 9F, here is the little Terrier number 82 Boxhill, not to be confused with Boxhill railway station on the Johnsonville line in New Zealand. This locomotive is an example of the famous London, Brighton and South Coast Railway A1 class, better known as Terriers due to their distinctive exhaust beat. Boxhill is from the last batch of Terriers built in 1880, and has a long history involving a bizarre conversion to the 240 wheel arrangement for motor train service. More information about this locomotive's history can be found in her Curator with a Camera episode. Boxhill is one of 2 Terriers that I've seen in person, the other one being number 72 Fenchurch. This engine is normally based at the Bluebell Railway in Sussex with number 55 Stepney, but I saw her while she was visiting the West Somerset Railway. Something I wasn't expecting to see in the museum was this Class 84 electric locomotive. 84001 was built in 1960 as one of the early electrics for the West Coast Main Line, but only had 19 years in service before she was withdrawn. She is now the sole survivor of a once 10-strong class. Sitting right next to the Class 84 was another sole survivor. This is South Eastern and Chatham Railway D-Class number 737, and she was built in 1901 to the design of Harry Wainwright. She remained in service through the Southern Railway era and even into British Railways days, not being withdrawn until 1956, by which time she was 55 years old, and now she is 124 years old. Unlike all the other surviving locomotives from the South Eastern and Chatham Railway, 737 has never run under her own power in preservation. Although I'm not as interested in the D-Class as other SECR locomotives, even I can't deny that 737 looks great in the lime green livery, which happens to be one of my favourite pre-grouping liveries. There are so many locomotives in the Great Hall that it's not funny, and to try and keep this video from getting too long, I'll only discuss another 5 locomotives while trying to keep their respective segments as brief as possible. There's something I have to ask before moving on to the next engine. Why the hell is the bullied Q1 displayed without her tender? This is North Eastern Railway 1001 class number 1275, built in 1874. Her class was designed for hauling freight trains, and they are perhaps better known as long boilers due to the design of their boiler, which had the firebox behind the rear driving axle and a longer barrel to increase heating surface. 1275 was the last of her class in service, not being withdrawn until February 1923, only 1 month after the North Eastern Railway became part of the London and North Eastern Railway. She was restored to working order in 1925 for the Stockton and Darlington Railway centenary celebrations, but that was the last time she ever ran under her own power. In 2018, this locomotive was modelled by Caledonia Works and released as an add-on for Train Simulator. As much as I'd like to review the long boiler add-on, I don't think it would be appropriate to do so as it was discontinued in September 2024. The long boiler happened to be coupled back-to-back with the world's fastest steam locomotive. 4468 Mallard is one of the famous LNER A4 Pacifics, designed by Sir Nigel Gresley and built between 1935 and 1938. The A4s are the stuff of legend for a whole host of reasons, including Mallard's record-breaking run between Grantham and Peterborough in July 1938. Mallard remained in service well into the British Railways era, not being withdrawn until 1963, by which time she would have been 25 years old. Most of her time in preservation has been spent on static display, although she did have some brief working stints in the 1980s. For a more detailed look at the A4s, feel free to watch the video I made about these locomotives in Train Simulator, which features the A4 add-on made by Caledonia Works. Much like the Class 84, here we have another locomotive that I wasn't expecting to see at the NRM. This is Livingston Thompson, one of the famous double fairley locomotives from the Festiniog Railway in Wales. She was built at Boston Lodge Works in 1886 and has been on display at the NRM since 1988, while some of her classmates are still in working order on their home turf. Incidentally, New Zealand Railways was another notable user of double fairleys, although only 10 of them were ever built for service in my country. Besides the Class 84, another electric locomotive on display in the Great Hall is 26020, an example of the EM1 class, later designated as Class 76. 57 examples of this class were built between 1950 and 1953, exclusively for service on the famous Woodhead line between Manchester, Sheffield and Wath. Sadly, the Woodhead line closed east of Hadfield in July 1981, only 27 years after being electrified. I've had a strong interest in the Woodhead line for over a decade at this point, so needless to say, I was very happy to finally see one of the iconic EM1 locomotives in person. Sadly, 26020 is the sole surviving example of this class, but you can still relive the glory days of the Woodhead line in Train Simulator. There are two versions of the route available, one set in 1954 and the other in 1981. Meanwhile, in the North Shed, one could find the world-famous LNER A3 Pacific No. 60103 Flying Scotsman. There is far too much to this locomotive's history for me to condense into a brief segment for this video, so I recommend looking for other videos and documentaries about him. For example, the Unlucky Tug has a well-researched documentary on his channel about Scotsman's USA tour. I've always preferred the A3s as they looked in LNER apple green, and as much as I hate Flying Scotsman being in a BR livery like so many other preserved engines these days, I was still happy to see this legend in person. Incidentally, this is one of 7 British steam locomotives whose footplates I stood on throughout the trip. It wasn't just Flying Scotsman on display in the North Shed. You could also see a vintage railcar from the Great Western Railway, as well as an interesting collection of models and other railway artefacts on display. My favourite of those models was this one depicting the Class 93, an electric locomotive that was planned as part of the cancelled Intercity 250 project. I recommend watching Rory McVeigh's video on this project if you want to learn more about it. Perhaps the weirdest / most cursed exhibit in the NRM is 35029, Ellerman Lines, an example of the Southern Railway Merchant Navy class, although this one was sectioned in 1974 to show the internal workings of a steam locomotive. I can understand the idea, but why the hell did they section a merchant navy, of all locomotives? Wouldn't something more generic with less mod cons, like an LMS Black 5, have been more suitable? I spent around 2 hours at the National Railway Museum, and I can safely say that I was very impressed with the exhibits on show, although I would be lying if I said I didn't struggle to handle the large crowds. As for what my favourite locomotive is from this collection, it's a tie between the LNER A4 Mallard, the Northeastern Long Boiler 060, and the EM1 Woodhead Electric. When it comes to the idea of visiting the NRM for yourself, I'll remind you of a quote from a song by Steve Winwood. While you see a chance, take it. It's a great place to visit for a day out, regardless of whether you're a rail fan or not. To close off this video, I'll leave you with some footage of the mainline trains in York, recorded before and after the NRM visit. Feel free to stay tuned for my next video, which should be about my trip from York to Church Fenton and return.